Hey, world history students, I hope you're having a nice week. This is our second lesson this week. And again, as a reminder, we're doing 2 lessons a week from here on out, unless the high school changes the schedule, which I don't think they're going to. I kind of like this new schedule. So anyway, this is our second lesson. And again, I am hosting a Google Meet during the 2 hour block that we have scheduled for each of our periods. So if you have any questions or want to check in on anything, definitely would love to see you in those Google Meets. So far, not a lot of students are signing into the Google Meets. And from what I'm gathering, that's not too outside of the norm. There are some teachers who say they have a lot of students logging in. Some teachers say it's only a handful. I've had more of that. So if you are available, I really, really do want you to log in. You can still do everything without logging in. You can still, learn everything you need to learn because I'm posting these videos and I'm trying to make this as accessible as possible. But I really would like you to log in so we can just sort of talk face to face, make sure you're understanding some of the key concepts. And so if you get a chance, please do log in to our Google Meets. If you don't, it's no big deal. I just cry myself to sleep every night because no one wants to see me. But it's okay. I still have my dog, Lexi. Nope, never mind. Lexi's not even here. So, but anyway, I'm teasing. Let's go ahead. Let's get into today's lesson. Today we are finishing the Holocaust. All right, and I know it feels like we've gone over Nazi Germany and the Holocaust ad nauseum for a while now. And listen, I'm not going to apologize for that because first, this is sort of us transitioning into this distance or remote learning. But in general, like it is so important to understand how the Nazis came to power, their ideology, why it's wrong, why it's bad. And then it's even more important to understand how that ideology that the Nazis had transitioned and displayed itself in what we now call the Holocaust, which was just a despicable display of the way humans can treat each other. And it's important for us to know that the Nazis weren't, the average German really wasn't much different than you or me. And that's what we are doing this week. We're looking at two scientific or psychological experiments that sort of show that we're all capable of doing acts that we would consider morally wrong uh, in certain circumstances. And so today we're going to do the second one of those. Um, and for homework, something just dinged. For homework, instead of doing a Google form, I just shared with you a simple prompt on a Google Doc. Each one of you has your own Google Doc, in which I just want you in a paragraph. You could write as much as you want, but do try to write a little bit more than a paragraph if you could, or around a paragraph or more. Nothing less than a paragraph is what I'm trying to say. Essentially about what you've learned about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, and what real world applications can you take from this lesson, either in your personal life or sort of what's going on in our world today. Anything that you can get out of these lessons that you can apply to what's happening in your life or in the lives of our citizens. So when we left off on our previous lesson, we did the Milgram experiment. And that was an experiment really interesting where people were giving fake electric shocks. They didn't realize they were fake shocks. They thought they were giving shocks to to another citizen, to another person. And they were just giving shocks because there was a person with a lab coat who sort of was like an authority, was telling them to do it. And it showed that we as citizens, we as people, um, we will usually listen to authority, even if we're doing things that we might not agree with. If someone of authority tells us to, we're very likely to do it. So that was the Milgram experiment. And Milgram took a lot of heat. Because people are saying, wow, that's pretty unethical, Dr. Milgram. Because imagine like these people that he was sort of doing this experiment on, he wasn't literally shocking people, but the people giving the shocks, they thought, in their mind, they thought that they just caused this other guy to collapse in pain. They thought that they were delivering a lot of pain. He was putting a lot of his subjects under a lot of psychological duress. Imagine if you were in the shoes of that person that was delivering the shocks. Immediately after the experiment was done, they would bring in the they would bring in the student, the quote unquote student, to show the subject that everyone was okay, that it was all an experiment, nobody was getting shocked. So they immediately they wanted to try to put the subject at ease. But still, Milgram took some heat because they nowadays we really can't do this type of experiment because of the psychological trauma it could inflict upon the subjects. This next experiment that we're going to go over today, this next experiment takes, if you think the Milgram experiment is pretty unethical, whoa, just wait till you see this one. But anyway, um, the reason that this is important, recently there has been a lot of protests across the nation, protests wanting to reopen the economy. What's interesting is that some of the images that come out of this protest, and I'm going to show you one right now, this is meant to show you that even today, a lot of the things that we heard and saw in Nazi Germany are still with us. This is literally in Columbus, Ohio. Last week, Columbus, Ohio, barely an hour away from Ashland, Ohio. And there is a protest, people protesting, saying our government needs to reopen the economy. The coronavirus isn't that bad. You're doing too much harm, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying one way or the other what I think of that, but intermixed through some of the different signs, you had a guy carrying around this sign. It says the real plague, sort of saying that the coronavirus isn't the real plague, but this is the real plague. And what that is, that's the Star of David. And this is sort of a stereotypical face of, again, this is straight out of Nazi Germany propaganda. A big nose. You have the yarmulke. This is supposed to represent a Jewish person or a Jewish rabbi, a person of Jewish faith at least. And they're in the shape of a rat, as though a Jewish person is a rat. And it's the Jewish people that are the real plague. That's what this is saying. This is in Ohio, 2020, April. So the idea of anti-Semitism and Nazism, it wasn't just, it wasn't just in the 20s and 30s back in Europe. And that's why it's important that we learn this so we don't let this type of ideology, take hold. Now, this is this person's First Amendment right, all right? This person's allowed to think what he wants to think as long as he's not acting on it and actually harming others. People are allowed to protest and carry ridiculous signs. But man, hopefully none of you, we probably all know at least one or two people who have similar these, I don't know why they gravitate towards this Nazi ideology. Hopefully none of you are gravitating towards that path. And if you are, take a long, hard look and a deep breath before you really go down that path. So let's go ahead and do our second experiment, and then this will wrap up the Holocaust. So similar to Milgram, there's going to be another experiment that's going to test what human beings are capable of. We call this the Stanford Prison Experiment. And the Stanford Prison Experiment, sorry, there is a little technical thing with some pictures there. The Stanford Prison Experiment was similar to the Milgram experiment. It's a psychological experiment. It's a study that is going to show that it is fairly easy. It shows how quickly and easily human behavior can turn evil. And the leader of this experiment, I shouldn't say the leader, the organizer, the guy who came up with the experiment, his name is Professor Philip Zimbardo. He is a psychology professor at Stanford University, and this happens back in 1971. Essentially, he puts out an advertisement to college-age males. College students, 75, I think these students got paid like 15 bucks a day or something to be a part of this experiment. College students will work for just about anything. But he was able to select 24 students that he thought were sort of the most psychologically, quote unquote, sort of normal. He looked through their applications and he tried to pick just 24 very typical students who didn't seem to have any sort of, outside of the norm characteristics. And each person of these 24 was randomly assigned one of two roles. They were either going to be a prisoner or a prison guard. All right. And these students, they all knew it. They all knew that this was an experiment. They knew that all 24 of them were just college kids and that they were randomly selected. This was all up front. There wasn't any chicanery, no trickery. They all knew that they were regular students. Half of them were just happened to be selected to be prisoners, the other half prison guards. And what Zimbardo will do is he is going to take a basement of one of the college's one of the college, not dormitories, one of the college hall's basements, and he turns it into a prison, a makeshift prison. Dr. Zimbardo himself will take on the role of prison warden. So essentially, he doesn't really do much. He interacts a little bit with the prison guards and prisoners, but by and large, he lets the prisoners and the prison guards handle things themselves. So here you can see a picture. I'm going to move my fat, ugly face. Here you can see this is a picture of one of the most infamous of the prison guards from this experiment. And here's a picture of the prisoners. And again, these are just college kids. These prisoners did nothing wrong. These prison guards had no, criminal justice training. These were just college kids randomly selected. So again, it's important to realize that all of these participants, they knew it was an experiment. They knew that the prisoners were not really prisoners. They knew the prison guards are not really prison guards. Everyone knew this going in. And what this was, it's an experiment that was trying to see, would these students' behaviors, would they change based on the environment that they were in? So outside of this prison, these were just typical students. Once they were put in this fake prison, even knowing it's a fake prison, will this change their behavior? Unlike the Milgram experiment, there's no researcher in the room with these people. So if you remember in the Milgram experiment, there's actually the researchers wearing the lab coats, and he's telling the teacher to keep delivering shocks. That's not going on here. All right, you just have the guards and the prisoners, and they have to figure it all out on their own. Very rarely would Professor Zimbardo step in. So what do you think happened? Put yourselves in these shoes. If you, everyone's in on it. Everyone knows that these prisoners aren't prisoners. Everyone knows these guards aren't guards. What's the worst that could happen? Like, why would you be mean to these prisoners who weren't really prisoners? It's just a goofy little psychology experiment. What do you think happened? So what we're going to do, we're going to watch a video about this. I'm going to pause it here and there, and we're going to see just what happens in the Stanford prison experiment. And it's weird, the Milgram experiment is able to be replicated. If you do the Milgram experiment today, as long as the people doing it aren't familiar with what's happening, you'll get pretty much the same results. This one isn't the same. People have tried to replicate this, and it's just not been able to be replicated. It partly is, well, you'll see it. Let's go ahead.
In 1971, in the basement of the psychology department of Stanford University, a mock prison was created. It rivaled all social psychology experiments in controversy.
Shortly after I finished this Stanford prison study, Milgram embraced me and said, "I'm so happy that you did this." He said, because now you can take off some of the heat that he's had to bear alone of having done the most unethical study.
Although this experiment is over 30 years old, its enduring power has been underscored by the events at Abu Ghraib.
It's actually 4 years old now.
When we got to Abu Ghraib, it was eerie. You're looking at the situation thinking, they've condoned this, but why?
All right, so real quick, I'm not going to go into this much. This video was produced shortly after, like around 2003. No, I'm sorry, around 2005. This Abu Ghraib, this was an infamous over when we had invaded Iraq. We had different prisons. Abu Ghraib was a prison that we had set up over in Iraq, where there were essentially the people that we had arrested. We were our soldiers who were not trained to be prison guards started doing really pretty nasty things, sort of tortured some of the Iraqi people in this prison. And so it doesn't really go into this. This is just sort of showing that the lessons that we had learned from the Stanford prison experiment played out in Abu Ghraib. So that's what this is. We're not going to dive into this, although it does show. It does show that even American servicemen and women, who are some of the finest in the world, when put in certain circumstances, can make pretty rough choices.
To understand why, it helps to reach back to the lessons of Zimbardo's experiment. how people respond to a cruel environment without clear rules.
So this is actual footage of the actual experiment. This is not a reenactment.
I think he and everybody else who came down into that situation got caught up into that situation. And the sense that this was an experiment, that began to fade away. It became just life.
We frankly didn't anticipate what was going to happen. And we tried to really test the power of the environment to change and transform otherwise normal people, much as Milgram had changed or transformed otherwise normal people in an obedience situation. We wanted to do it in a prison-like situation.
Over 70 men volunteered for Zimbardo's experiment.
And they completed a battery of psychological tests. We picked 24 who were the most normal and most healthy. Half are going to be guards, half are going to be prisoners. And it's like flipping a coin. And heads, this one's a guard, this one's a prisoner. So at the beginning, there's no difference in the kinds of people who are in your two groups.
When we were given our jobs as guards, we were issued a uniform, which...
All right, so this guy, I'm going to pause it occasionally here and there. I don't want to draw it out too much. This guy is going to be one of the guards. He gets known as being one of the cruelest, just worst people. I'll be honest, I have a hard time listening to this guy. When you watch, we're not going to watch the whole details because it's pretty gruesome. It's graphic. And to see what he did to some of the prisoners and forced them to do is just awful. And I have a hard time listening to him, but I need to do better at taking a cup of my own medicine and be understanding that in any circumstance we can all do terrible things. But this guy is going to be known as he's what they call the John Wayne Guard. It's really interesting listening to him, sort of. In my mind, I think he's trying to justify his behavior. I have a hard time with it. But anyway, all right, we'll let it keep going.
It was a plain sort of khaki or lighter colored uniform.
And then we gave them the symbols of power, handcuffs, a whistle, a big billy club. And then the other thing we gave them were silver reflecting sunglasses.
When you have mirror sunglasses on, then nobody can see your eyeballs. I think that anytime you put on what essentially is a mask, and you mask your identity, then it allows you to behave in ways that you would not behave if you didn't have the mask on.
To make it more realistic, I had arranged with this Palo Alto Police Department to make mock arrests.
It's a great music. I love the 70s.
When I was arrested, it was a surprise to me. I didn't think I was going to be brought to an actual police station. I didn't think I was going to go through a booking process.
The guards then put a blindfold on them, stripped them naked, smocks with no underpants. Each had a number that replaced their name. They had to know the number. They could only be referred to by that number. And they had a chain on one foot, which was put there to remind them at all times of their loss of freedom. So all of these things produces a sense of being dehumanized.
Dehumanization. Remember that.
On the first day, I said, this is not going to work. I mean, the guards felt awkward giving orders, and they'd say, okay, line up, repeat your numbers, and the prisoners start giggling.
I don't want anybody laughing. 3, 2, 1.
And then a very interesting thing happened. Dave Eshelman, who the prisoner's named John Wayne, like he's a Wild West cowboy, he begins to be more extreme.
I decided that I would become the worst, most intimidating, cruel prison guard that I could possibly be.
I see in the future that you do work when you're told. Say it again. Say bless you, correctional officer.
I was sort of fascinated myself that people were believing the act, and I was trying to see how far I could take it before somebody would say, okay, that's enough, stop.
We did have to do things like push-ups. We would have to sing things. At the beginning, we protested some of the actions. We did things to irritate the guards.
Authority was challenged right off the bat. And the guards had to decide how they were going to handle that, and they had to decide it without our input. I mean, again, this was not a Milgram study in which we were standing over them telling them what to do. And they began to see the prisoners' behavior as a kind of an affront to their authority. And they began to push back.
We would ramp up the general harassment, just sort of crank it up a bit. Nobody was telling me I shouldn't be doing this. The professor is the authority here. You know, he's the prison warden. He's not stopping me.
This is unbelievable. I thought the door.
There was the first evening a kind of rebellion that took place.
The prisoners rebelled. They barricaded themselves in their cells and said, we refuse to come out. They took off their numbers. They didn't want to be de-individuated. They started cursing the guards to their face. And the key turning point was the guards began to think of them as dangerous prisoners. And so the guards formulated a plan, used fire extinguishers, took the doors down, dragged the prisoners out, stripped them naked, and essentially broke the rebellion in a purely physical way.
From that point on, the study was as remarkable a series of events as I've ever seen. It was a real laboratory for Zimbardo and I to watch human nature transformed in a very rapid way in the face of a very powerful situation.
People really suffered. I mean, guards did terrible things to the prisoners. They punished them by putting them in solitary confinement, which was a small closet. You could squat or stand, but you couldn't sit, and it was dark and dank, actually.
Every hour, every day, there's a teeny little bit more of an increment. And they're stepping up, taunting the prisoners. They're stepping up. The count's not letting them sleep. They're stepping. I don't think from one minute to the next, the people who are in it see the change and see the difference.
And that's an important point, that it's incremental, that every day they got a little meaner, and a little meaner. Even though this is more about personal change of behavior, that's also what happened in Germany, that the Nazi people slowly over time, incrementally, just sort of let Nazism foment and get bigger and bigger before it was too late. But anyway, we'll keep on going here.
And then the next key thing happened beside the rebellion. Prisoner 8612, he was the first one to have an emotional breakdown.
Oh no, I gotta go. To a doctor, anything. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? Help now!
And again, I mean, that's only a small snippet. I had to edit a lot because this guy is losing it. Because, I mean, imagine, you think you're part of a psychological experiment, that you're doing nothing wrong. You just got assigned the role of a prison guard. Or, I'm sorry, you just got assigned the role of a prisoner. And now all of a sudden it's like, wait, no, I'm actually in prison here. What? Mentally, like, how would you cope with that? It's like, what is happening? What is real? What is not real? This guy is having a breakdown. And a lot of them do. A lot of the prisoners do.
At the time, if you had questioned me about the effect I was having, I would say, well, they must be a wimp. They're weak, or they're faking. Because I wouldn't have believed that what I was doing could actually cause somebody to have a nervous breakdown. It was just us sort of getting our jollies with it. Let's be like puppeteers here. Let's make these people do things.
The guards now began to escalate their use of power. Some of them had prisoners clean out toilet bowls with their bare hands. They now taunt, humiliate, degrade the prisoners in front of each other, and they exert arbitrary control over the prisoners.
They keep thinking of more and more unusual things to do.
I love you too, I love you too. You smile too, athlete. You get down here and do 10 push-ups.
The guards knew that had the coin come up heads rather than tails, they would have had the dress on rather than the uniform on. They knew that. So they certainly knew that the prisoners who were being mistreated had done nothing wrong to deserve the mistreatment. And yet the roles themselves were so powerful and the environment itself was so powerful that they ended up punishing those prisoners as though they had done something wrong.
We were told to chant something about how he was a bad prisoner. And at the time I went along with it, I'm thinking, what does this matter? We don't believe this, but we can go along and chant it.
Because of what prisoner 819 did, myself is the best. Because of what prisoner 819 did, myself is the best.
This
That
is
night,
an
he had a
experiment.
breakdown. Every day after that,
nuts.
another prisoner broke down in a similar way. Broke down. I mean, extreme stress reaction. We released another one on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Nobody who was in that study could deny that the prisoner breakdowns were genuine. They were scary to see. They were upsetting to us. They were unexpected, but they were very clearly the real thing. At some level, we understood that something was happening that we were no longer in control of. It was damaging people. We didn't quite have a grasp on what to do about it. One of the mistakes we made was that we hadn't built in time to step back and to look at what was happening and call it what it was, which was mistreatment. We were caught up in the events that were taking place.
Or you can keep your blankets, and 416 will stay in another day. We got 3 against 1. Keep your blankets, 416, you're going to be in there for a while. So just get used to it.
On the 5th day of the study, Zimbardo invited his girlfriend, recent psychology graduate Christina Maslach, to visit the mock prison.
I had heard bits and pieces from Phil about what was going on. And then when I was down there that evening, it really was kind of a wow. The thing that really got to me was when some of the guards took the prisoners down the hall to the men's room.
She looks out and sees a line of the prisoners with paper bags over their heads, each one holding the other one's shoulder.
And they're leading them down the hall. And Phil comes over and look, my God, look at that. And I looked up and something about it just, again, it was the dehumanizing, demeaning kind of treatment. I couldn't watch it.
And she said, "It's terrible what you're doing to those boys." And she got tears in her eyes. I said, "What?" And she runs out. And I'm furious. I'm saying, look, this is, I run outside. We have this big argument. I'm saying, look, this is dynamics of human behavior. Look, it's fascinating, the power of the situation. So I'm giving her all the psychological basis. And what kind of psychologist are you? You don't appreciate this. And she said,
"I don't understand. You're a stranger to me. I don't understand this. How could you not see what I see? I mean, you're a caring, compassionate person. I know you from all of these other things. Something's gone wrong here."
And then the next thing she said, which had an equally big impact, is, "I'm not sure I want to, have anything to do with you if this is the real you." And that was like a slap in the face, because what she was saying is, you've changed. The power of the situation has transformed you from the person I thought I knew to this person that I don't know. And at that moment I said, wow, you're right. We got to end it.
After only 6 days, Dr. Zimbardo shut down his experiment.
So that's the Stanford Prison Experiment. And again, it was supposed to last, I think, like 2 weeks. And he had to shut it down after 6 days. And it's because his girlfriend came in and was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing to these kids? Like, what is going on here?" And Zimbardo himself at first was furious at her because he says, "What do you mean? This is amazing. Look at what we're proving. We're proving that human behavior is so malleable that if you put people in a certain environment and give them specific roles, their behavior changes. This is amazing." And she's like, "You are hurting these kids. You are a monster, essentially. What are you doing?" And all of a sudden, it's like he wakes up and he's like, "Oh crap. Yeah, these are human beings." Like he himself had, instead of seeing these young men as human beings, he's seeing them as psychological subjects. And so again, he was dehumanizing these subjects. The guards were dehumanizing these subjects, and these well-educated young men and well-educated professors were letting these things happen. It's just amazing. And the one guard and I've seen a lot of interviews with him. I can't stand him. I need to be a better person. But man, when you see and hear some of the things he said and did to the guards, and how he I feel like he tries to justify it. But again, who knows? I may have done the same thing. So I need to take a spoonful of my own medicine. So here are the results. Within a day, these average American college students, they took on the fake roles and they succumbed to their environment. The guards started to act like what they thought prison guards were. And eventually, they start to become very brutal. They are not trained on how to, in a moral and ethical way, handle prisoners. So they're just acting on what they've seen on TV. They're sort of succumbing to their environment. So eventually they start to dehumanize the prisoners. They call the prisoners by numbers. They start to see the prisoners as enemies. And because of that, they do terrible things to these prisoners. And they know that these are not real criminals. Not that you should treat criminals badly. I'm not even saying that. It just blows your mind. The prisoners, by the end, the ones who don't, there are some that have to be released early because they just have they have a breakdown. I would have a breakdown. But the ones who sort of stay, they actually begin to take on the role of prisoners. And it's interesting to listen to interviews with them because they themselves take on the role of being dehumanized. They would actually refer to themselves as numbers instead of using their own names. And it was almost, they said it was almost like being hypnotized. It was like they were a completely different person after, after a couple days of this. And even Dr. Zimbardo got caught up in his role as the warden. Even he couldn't see what was happening and the immorality of it. He was more interested, in these students as psychological subjects, but also he also will admit that he took on this role as a prison warden. At one point, they were worried that there was going to be this big prison break. It's really interesting. He I don't know. Well, I'm not going to keep going. I'm sorry. Um, so what does this have to do with the Holocaust? This last two lessons, the Milgram experiment and the Zimbardo experiment. Both of these experiments, and it's important to realize these both occurred in America with average Americans, and they both showed how a nation or how rational citizens could maybe allow something like the Holocaust to occur. Milgram proved that not anyone, but most people are willing to obey orders, even if it goes against their moral compass. Over two-thirds of Americans in Milgram's experiment would deliver very deadly shocks if some guy in a lab coat told them to. Zimbardo, what he shows is that our behavior can change very rapidly. These guards who did dehumanizing things, they didn't get in any kind of trouble for this, like for what they were doing, and a lot of them grew up to be, just good family men. They, had families and good people, go to church, all that good stuff. But in that moment, in that environment, given the role that they weren't ready for, their behavior changed to the part where they were like evil, some of them. Normal people can perform terrible acts when placed in an extreme environment, particularly if they're not trained on how to handle and cope with that environment. So these kids were put into an extreme prison-like environment, and the guards didn't know how to be guards, so they were just taking on the role of what they thought a guard would do. And it's important to realize that there's nothing unique about the personal qualities of the average German citizen during the Holocaust. Um, and that's what these lessons show, that any average person, given certain directions from authority and being put in the right environment, um, can can do terrible things, and things that we would normally consider very immoral, much like the Germans did during World War II and the Holocaust. And again, I'm not excusing that. I'm not excusing the Holocaust. I'm not excusing the Nazis, all right, at all. But again, it's important to realize that that darkness, that evil that existed in Nazi Germany, if left unchecked, a lot of people in a lot of countries, including the United States, can go down that dark path, um, and that's evident by the picture I showed at the beginning of this lesson. That even today in Columbus, Ohio, you have people essentially throwing out there that anti-Semitic um, um, Nazi-like propaganda. All right, so that's it. That's it for the lesson. That's it for the Holocaust. Hopefully you found it interesting. I hope you found some things enlightening. I hope you learned some of the history about the Holocaust, which is very important, why we need to remember it. And as the years go on, we have fewer and fewer and fewer survivors of the Holocaust left to tell their story. And so it's important that we remember their story so that we don't repeat it. But also, um, hopefully you've learned a little bit about how good people can let something like the Holocaust occur, and that the Germans in the 1920s and the 1930s weren't just inherently evil. Some of them may have been. Like, I still think that dude in the Stanford prison experiment is just inherently, at his core, there's something off there, but well, I shouldn't judge. Um, Maybe, but in general, a majority of Germans are probably average citizens like you and me. But in the right circumstances, with the right people in power, terrible things can happen. And it's an important lesson that all of us need to know so that we can be on guard of our own personal biases, as well as to recognize if we see that in those similar things in the people that we vote to put in power of our own country. All right, so that's it. Today then, I just have a prompt I would like you to do. Just at least try to answer in a paragraph things you've learned about the Holocaust, anything that you have found personally relevant in any way, shape, or form about the Holocaust. And then the next 2 weeks, we're going to do World War II. The 2 weeks after that, we're going to hit the Cold War. Going to sort of do more of a survey. We're going to go pretty, cover a decent amount of ground and a handful of lessons. And then after that, we have to do honestly, after that, I'm not sure how finals are going to work. So we'll figure that out later. But I hope you've had a good week. Thank you for going through the lessons of the Holocaust with me. I know it can be kind of deep. It's very interesting, but I also know it can be kind of a difficult subject to really dive into. But again, it's very important. So, all right, everyone, have a great week, great weekend. I will see you on the Google Meets. Please, 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 please. I'd love to see you. All right, talk to y'all later. Bye.